Hello everybody, my name is Alex Odie and I'm here to do an interview about my work done with the great astronomer Edwin Hubble and our observations of extragalactic astronomy in space. So my first question, tell us your name and tell us about your project. Well, my name is Alex Odie, as I previously mentioned, and I got to work alongside the great astronomer Edwin Hubble, and our project was based upon extragalactic astronomy in space, which all started back in the 1920s when Edwin made his discovery just looking at the stars, and what he had noticed was that the stars have a different brightness in a patch of light. And at this time in the 1920s, this was known as Andromeda Nebula. The next question, what were you guys trying to find or do? Okay, so at this time in history, when Edwin and I were working together, everyone was convinced that there were no other galaxies other than the Milky Way. I'm assuming this was due to just because the Milky Way is the galaxy in which Earth lies in. So what we were trying to do, based on our observations of the stars and the brightness and the patch of light, referring to the Andromeda Nebula, was that there were actually whole separate galaxies out there, and that the universe was constantly expanding and it was a lot bigger than people previously thought. So when Edwin he discovered a star called Cephapid, which is a variable star in the Andromeda Nebula. Using the calculation that Henrietta Leavitt previously came up with, he used it to calculate the distance to Cepheid. Edwin found out something very interesting when he did his calculations, that Cepheid was actually much further away than anyone had ever previously thought. It was also discovered that Cepheid was not just a big ball of spacious gas, but it was actually in its own separate galaxy apart from the Milky Way and a lot further away, meaning that in fact there were other galaxies out there besides the Milky Way. So that was a huge discovery for us. After this discovery, Edwin and I started classifying our galaxies by their brightness, shape, distance, and pattern. And these observations helped us make history and in another discovery. By the observations of the redshifts in the light's wavelength emitted by galaxies, we made the discovery that galaxies were actually moving away from each other at a constant rate. And the distance between the galaxies are now known as Hubble's law, due to his partaking on the discovery. This discovery also led to the expansions of galaxies that began with his calculation, and also confirmed the Big Bang Theory. Edwin also contributed to building a 200-inch telescope, which also helped in Mount Palomar Observatory, and he was honored to get to use that the first time ever for his efforts in helping build that. My third question, where did your project and experiment occur? Okay, so our project first started in 1924, and the discovery took place on Mount Wilson Observatory in California using a 100-inch Hooker telescope. The publishing of these findings about the furthest galaxies and then moving further away was released in March of 1929. What other specific events were happening at the time in the world at the time? Okay, so during this time when we were making our observations, there was actually a pretty big thing going on called World War II. And it was very significant at that time. Edwin wanted to make a contribution to the war effort because he didn't feel like he was doing enough back in the U.S. just figuring out astronomy. He decided to be the head of ballistics, and later on he was awarded a Medal of Merit for his duties that he contributed. Who else was involved in the project? Other people who were involved in the project other than Edwin and I were Milton Humansum, and however that Harriet Leventi didn't help, her calculations did help us and aid in our discovery. And also Albert Einstein, who is obviously the base of everybody's scientific or physics explorations, and they both helped to aid in our research even though they physically were not there. What was the role in the project? My role in the project was simply to provide assistance to Hubble, and when building the telescope I also got to help him put it together and be precise with that and Hubble's law. And what impact did our project have on the physics community? One of the major impacts that our project had on the physics community was obviously Hubble's law, which specifically states, expanding universe, the distant galaxies we're seen in all directions are moving away from the Earth as evidence in their redshifts. Hubble's law describes this expansion. The fact that we see other galaxies moving away from us does not imply that we're the center of the universe. And therefore it changed the way how we perceive space itself. And my last question, what was the most fascinating part about working with Hubble and partaking in the success of his discoveries? Well, the most fascinating part was just working with him because he was a genius and he was so bright and had so many wonderful ideas. The other thing was changing everyone else's perception about space and astronomy as a whole. And at that point, no one had any indication that the universe was as vast as it was, let alone expanding at the rate that it is. However, all of that was great. The best part of it all was getting to meet Albert Einstein, who dropped by one day to thank us for our work on Hubble's law, which was something. That was probably my favorite part of getting to work with Edwin Hubble. I want to thank you all for interviewing me and taking the time out of your day. It was nice to meet you all and share my story about working with the great astronomer, Edwin Hubble. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you all. Bye-bye.